Welcome to Wait What? Sportsbiz Chat with DP and McGee, the podcast where we take a sometimes irreverent, sometimes cynical, and yes, even a sometimes serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, Tim McGee.
And I'm David Parro.
David, welcome back from Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you.
Big weekend on the sports calendar for many, many reasons. One in particular comes to mind. But what's up? What's on your mind?
Well, let's just deal with that right off the bat.
What was that?
We? Avengement is thine is what I was thinking of. So you closed the episode last week talking about avenging Penn State, avenging Maryland, and it played out exactly like you wanted it to. And I just kept thinking of Inigo Montoya, and the scene from Princess Bride, which had popped into my head last week. The character played brilliantly by Mandy Patinkin in the great Rob Reiner film. But yes, congratulations to you. It had to be amazing. It was and that final game really was great. So a well-earned championship for Big Red. Awesome.
Thank you so much. It had been since 1977 since they last won a championship, and certainly enough heartbreak between then and now, including losing to Maryland in 2022, losing in the final minute to Syracuse in 2009, losing in the final minute to Johns Hopkins in 1987, class of 1978. Some of the members of that team I have come to know. That team, as freshmen, couldn't play varsity. Their team went undefeated. They won the championship 76 and 77, went undefeated through their entire senior year until they lost the championship game, the only loss of their collegiate career. But I want to channel my inner Roger Bennett from Men in Blazers for 1 second. Not since the famous episode on Game of Thrones has the color red played such a significant role in vengeance. But yes, they beat Penn State. And Penn State held C.J. Kurse, the all-time leading scorer in NCAA lacrosse, pointless for the first time in 65 games. He was quiet for the first half of the Maryland game and then came on and scored 6 goals in the second half. I can't tell you how many people that fans of the program, former players, classmates that I have talked to that have we are over the moon. But thank you.
Yeah, I think, listen, they played in front of 32,500 at Gillette Stadium outside of Boston. And it seems as though, when I've checked in on the last few championships, the vibe there seemed incredible. Two great programs, obviously. And then prior to that, almost 14,500 to watch the women's championship, North Carolina against Florida. Carolina Tar Heels coming out on top in that. So, I think a good point for the sport as more people continue to, understand it and see it and watch it. I mean, you're an insider, and I don't say that in a bad way. So you just know the sport and follow it so closely because of your alma mater, et cetera. But it was great. It's great television. I thought the production was solid. The announcing crew was great. And the storylines in lacrosse are also great. And obviously we know that Cornell has quite a few behind it. So yeah, again, congrats. Exciting, a nice Memorial Day event to watch. I will say that. I was pretty fired up about it, Tim.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. I will say this. John Tillman, the Maryland coach, is a Cornell grad. And Mike Levine, head of CAA Sports, was actually interviewed during the broadcast. He was a teammate of John Tillman's at Cornell. But John Tillman is a fantastic coach, but he's 2-7 in national championship games. So I'm sure there's some haters down in Maryland who are not happy with that record. But I think if you asked any lacrosse program in the country if they could get to 9 championship games, would they be happy with their coach's performance? They would say yes. So kudos to him for having a fantastic run over the last 10 or so years at the program.
Because we haven't talked about the NFL in a while, which is kind of rare for us. But I did want to say the NFL lost one of its, the owner of the Indianapolis Colts passed away at a very young age, 65 years old.
Yeah.
Jim Irsay, who was the son of Robert Irsay, who had acquired the franchise in 1972. So the family has controlled this team for quite a while. I mean, obviously there are some older family ownerships, but this has been a pretty steady one. The team will be turned over to his children, I think, led by Carly Irsay Gordon. And he was a stalwart as far as the NFL. He won Super Bowls. He had a interesting reputation. He battled some addiction problems.
Hmm.
He was known as a musician. He had an unbelievable guitar collection, some like really killer guitars, and he was kind of a rock guy. His cameo in the episode of Parks and Recs was a great one. Also featuring Andrew Luck and Marvin Harrison, which I thought was pretty cool. And so he seemed like that fun party life guy, and but he did battle some problems, it seems. But man, that's just too damn young. But it
Yeah.
seems as though the team is in good family hands still.
Yeah, it was sad to read of his passing. My first job out of school was down in Baltimore. It was the year after the moving trucks pulled up to Memorial Stadium and left in the dead of night for Indianapolis, which absolutely crushed the city of Baltimore. There's a famous bar or series of bars in Baltimore called Schaefer's. One of them is right off the Inner Harbor, and you would go into Schaefer's after work, and there was a huge um, stuffed Robert Ursay hanging in effigy in the corner of the bar. They did not take kindly to that team leaving. Obviously, Art Modell moved the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore, where they became the Ravens, and then the Browns were reconstituted as a team, and so everything came around. But yeah, it's he had some success as an owner, and it's a legacy of everything that you described. But I think he was he was open about those addiction problems. So hopefully he helped some people who suffered from similar things. But
Yeah. Yeah, he was also recognized. I mean, you mentioned the moving of the team to Indianapolis, which was a really big deal. But he ingratiated himself to the community as somewhat of a fun-loving owner,
Mhm.
and also one that philanthropically was very active. And I think that while they might not have had as much success as hardcore fans would have liked over the last few years, I think he has brought them success. And I don't think anyone didn't think that Jim Irsay loved that team and loved being part of the Indianapolis community.
Yep.
One other weird thing, and we'll talk about racing in a bit because it was a big racing weekend, as you know, everyone. One of his daughters, Casey Irsay Foyt, waved the green flag at the Indianapolis 500.
Well, Foyt is
She's married to AJ Foyt's grandson. AJ Foyt being one of the I think four-time winners of the Indianapolis 500. Do I have
Mhm.
that right?
I'm not sure. Who are the other ones? Al Unser Sr. might have been one.
Al Unser Sr., nice. Rick Mears
Uh-huh.
and Helio Castroneves.
Oh, okay. I was going to
Good
say
company.
Gordon Johncock, just to
Out of
say the name Gordon
Just to
John.
say the name. Yeah. Gordon Johncock in IndyCar racing, Dick Trickle in NASCAR, two best names in racing. Next to Speed Racer, of course. All right. Over to you.
Interesting times in the WNBA. Caitlin Clark, who has not missed a game since high school, and I don't believe she missed any games in high school either, is out for an estimated 4 weeks with a quad injury. And so I think there's going to be a good test that Kathy Engelbert would not like to see conducted. What effect Caitlin Clark has on attendance and viewership, because there are several games that she's going to miss, one of which is scheduled for prime time on CBS. The get-in price on some of the games have already dropped precipitously since her injury. So it'll be very curious to see how her absence impacts
Mm.
um, attendance and viewership. I will say the one person who might be happy, and I'm saying it facetiously, is Caitlin Clark's agent, because I think what we will see is that this will demonstrate uh, the impact she has on the league. Uh, so,
She is a significant part of everything that the WNBA is doing. Certainly, there are big names, and I think Paige Beckers has brought some, additional excitement, of course. But it's, this is where the league really has to make sure that they're marketing all the other stars, marketing the teams. But yeah, I do suspect that it will have its impact. There's no doubt, because when you mentioned Caitlin's agent, I mean, she is everywhere right now. She's everywhere. In terms of she's everywhere, like the new Mission Impossible movie is everywhere, which is like, I don't know how many tie-ins a new movie can have brand wise, but Tom Cruise doing things that someone his age probably shouldn't be doing, but amazingly he's still doing them, seems to be connected with everything. She's like that. She's everywhere.
She almost runs the risk of overexposure.
Yeah.
I would think I think she and her agent, I think, will probably pare back a little bit on the things. But listen, you and I are old enough to remember when Michael Jordan came into the league 40 years ago. People forget he did Gatorade, he did Upper Deck, he did Hanes underwear. Obviously, he did Nike.
He did McDonald's.
He did McDonald's. He did Ballpark Franks, which I could never understand how he could do both of those, but he did. I mean, he was everywhere. He was ubiquitous in his endorsement deals. Rayovac batteries.
Wait, what? You remember Rayovac batteries?
This is my business,
Nice.
David. This is my business. It's just not what I do. It's who I am.
Rayovac batteries. I'm trying to think of what the creative was around that, but it's not coming to mind. I have to say.
But
we're gonna look it up on our YouTube version. I will have a point of purchase display of Michael in a Rayovac ad.
Yep. So very similar, right? Start the career, make the money now. We'll see what happens.
The only thing that matters is does the commercial endeavor hurt her on-court performance? And if that slips, then people won't forgive it. But I don't anticipate that being the case with someone like Caitlin Clark.
Well, let's go back to statistics 101. Correlation does not imply causation. It doesn't matter. That's what the fans would think. Yeah, that's right. Perception becomes reality. But you're right. The immediate thought will be, well, she's not focused on her game. If her game should slip. So
remember when the Bears won the Super Bowl and Ditka started doing every commercial?
Mm-hmm.
It made a difference, and the players knew it. He was a joke as a coach at that point. I hate to say it. I'm a Bears fan, and I'm sorry the people that still go Ditka, but
I was in a meeting just yesterday with the brand team from Chunky Soup at Campbell's. The trivia, who was the first endorser that Chunky Soup used? It was Mike Ditka, to your point, going back to 1987, I want to say. So
you're not under any NDA that this can't air, because I'm airing it. Okay.
No, I mean, it's a fact that he was the first endorser.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about
the recipe. I'm not talking about the recipe.
Talking about the part that you were in a meeting with your client, Chunky Soup.
Yes. No,
right.
There is not. Okay. I have not divulged anything.
I want to do a bit of a motorsports roundup, because last week I talked about all of the activity going on Memorial Day weekend. Indy 500, Fox's first go at the Indy 500, the greatest spectacle in racing as it's known. I will say this first. for most of the race, the drivers were not making it appear to be the greatest spectacle in racing. It was some bad driving. But Fox threw out all the stops. Is that the right expression? They threw out all the stops?
Pulled out all the
Pulled out
stuff.
all the stops? Yeah, that would make more sense. Pulled out all the stops. They had everyone there. Strahan was there. Tom Brady was there. Strahan did the pace lap, and he was white knuckling that thing, man. I was nervous for him.
Well, I think it might, one of the announcers, I'm not sure if it was Tony Stewart or somebody else, said the importance of the role of being a pace car driver, because there's 33 drivers who are depending upon you to set their tachometers and speed.
So they went in the broadcast and had him on while he was driving, and he had the guy next to him telling him when to speed up, and he had to do that. He had to have him right at the right speed. And Strahan was talking. I mean, massive respect for Michael Strahan in that moment, because he had to be nervous. He's going a $120 or so on the pace lap,
Right.
and talking and being told what to do. Now it's a flat racetrack, it's not banked like NASCAR type track, so it's but still, I was impressed with that. The broadcast team, pretty good. They have Will Buxton over from F1. Doing play-by-play. James Hinchcliffe, massive pro, loved him. Danica was there. Tony Stewart, I think, does great insight. They brought Jeff Gordon in, who's obviously from Indiana, loves that race, even though he became a NASCAR star. So the broadcast team was all in. Like, they went in big, like the Indy 500 should be, and that's cool, because this race is not like the rest of Indy racing, right? It's not. It's Indy 500 and then the rest of IndyCar.
RL could go away completely and they would still have the Indy 500.
I think so. And that's cool. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not knocking it. Daytona 500, the first race of the NASCAR season, is the big one there, but it's even a little different. F1 doesn't have that race. Sure, Monaco is bigger and more famous than a lot of races, but it's another race, and they don't necessarily do anything special other than the locations it's in.
It's also a snooze fest as a race fan.
It's a snooze fest. Yeah, but it's really cool.
Well,
but it is
okay. All
but
right. Have you ever been to Monaco?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Fox got over 7 million for its debut.
Yep, up 40% from last year. 40%.
Best audience since 2008. When they got 7.25. So that's huge. Congratulations to everybody on the team for delivering that.
And it was also a sellout for the first time in several years. I want to say 2017 or 2018.
Yes.
So that they were able to broadcast it locally, which is great for Indiana folks.
And that certainly, I think, helped the overall viewership numbers, because there are race fans throughout that area and throughout that DMA that are going to want to watch the race that aren't going. Yeah, 350,000 on site. It was quite the spectacle. Roger Penske got up and actually spoke before it. And I don't know if that was a bit of a reaction. And he owns it all now.
Right.
So I don't know if that was somewhat of a reaction to the scandal that we talked about last week, that he wanted to have the public face that he was there. But it was a smart move and a good move. So all in all, congratulations to them. F1 actually did get a pretty good number out of Monaco, because that's where they were this past week. They set, I think, the third largest U.S. audience ever for a Grand Prix. But the number obviously paled in comparison overall. 2.3 million viewers tuned in to the race-only portion of that event. I have not seen what NASCAR did in its first Amazon Prime Video broadcast of the Coke 600 from Charlotte, which was the evening night race that capped off the tremendous Memorial Day weekend race slate for Sunday. But I have heard that the production was reviewed very well. The broadcast seemed to get pretty good. Some thumbs up from people on the media side. I tuned in a bit of it. It looked quite good. So all in all, I think a pretty successful weekend for that. And I do want to add one other thing, that we had on the director of Earnhardt, the documentary, last week, and that documentary launched on Prime last week. And the last episodes, I think, are going to be up tomorrow. The episodes 3 and 4. That series is now currently trending as the top series viewed on Amazon Prime. So just, is coincidence? I don't know.
No, to answer your question, the short answer is no, it is not a coincidence. We are the antithesis of the Madden curse or the SI curse. And there is nobody who can convince me otherwise.
Well, I will say this. For those of you that didn't pick up last week's podcast, go see this documentary on Prime Video. It's spectacular. A great look at the life of Dale Earnhardt Sr. and the implications of him as a racer, as a businessman, and as a family man.
I said it when we had Josh on last week. It's a Greek tragedy, the story. And I think there are people who will find it fascinating, even if they're not race fans, even if they don't know who Dale Earnhardt is, although it's hard to believe that somebody isn't at least familiar with his name.
Think so.
All right, we've got a great guest coming up. So we'll be back in just a moment.
It's time for our guest.
We are back, and we are really pleased to welcome our next guest. Dr. Maura Smith has spent her career working with a broad spectrum of athletes, focusing on building mental skills which benefit athletes in all sports at all levels. Dr. Smith helps athletes develop a repertoire of mental skills, enabling them to handle whatever comes their way. She has become a pioneer in the concept of mental strength and conditioning. Maura is a graduate of, yes, Cornell University. She received her doctorate from Boston University. She's worked with United States Olympic athletes and Paralympians. She's worked with various national governing bodies, including USA Hockey, USA Gymnastics, US Figure Skating, and a host of others. Welcome to the show, Maura.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right to it. Want to start and ask you, you've been working with athletes from the youth level all the way up to really elite level athletes for almost 35 years. What's the biggest change you've seen in athletes since you started working with them?
Whoa, big question to start. And I know I have limited time, so I'm going to try to put this through a funnel here.
That's why you're a Cornell grad, so we know you can handle anything.
Yeah, exactly. I can handle whatever comes my way. So I guess a couple of things come to mind. And I think one is something that lots of people talk about when it comes to youth sport, and that's the idea of early specialization, so that, back in the day when we were growing up and we played, whatever sport was in season and kind of continued that probably all the way through middle school, that has really changed, so that kids at a much younger age are kind of deciding what their sport is, along with their parents, by the way, because let's remember, like, a 6-year-old doesn't have too much agency in that space, but that the specialization early on really has changed a lot of things, I think, in terms of physical literacy. So even kind of the physical development that we have. I mean, if you want to see a horrible football throw, like, watch hockey players throw football. Like, you develop certain things kind of through that cross training or multi-sport just enjoyment, and that has really diminished a lot. And the second thing I think that has changed in those many decades is I don't know whether, but travel teams, like the advent of travel teams, so that when a kid, even if they were talented, played on their town team, they were playing with a broad spectrum of talent. So there were kids, some kid might really understand soccer and at 7, and there's still kids like doing cartwheels and kind of picking dandelions, and they're figuring it out at that early age. And travel teams, especially those for much younger kids, really change the equation a lot in that uh, the stakes immediately get much higher. There's a financial cost, there's usually a travel cost, and the kids are very similar. So, whereas on a town team, you might have been like much better than the other kids, but you were also figuring out how to give the other kids an extra shot or how to, let somebody take a few extra at bats. That doesn't exist on a travel team. And um, kids go into that becoming fearful of making mistakes. So the biggest growth in sport happens when kids play to try new things and take risks and see what they can do. And I think when you get in a early high stakes situation, no matter what, it feels it's a lot. And just by nature of the way those structures, those environmental structures are set up, kids start to play to not make mistakes and be fearful, as opposed to like trying something cool and seeing if it works.
I have a quick follow-up question for you. You and I have had this conversation before. You are a big proponent of unstructured play, and I think we all grew up around the time where we went out to the schoolyard and we kicked a soccer ball around or threw a football around or played softball, baseball, whatever it is. What is the benefits to, and you don't see that very much. You go by any schoolyard today, and very rarely will you see unstructured play. What are the benefits to kids of unstructured play? I think this is fascinating.
I mean, so you could, I could reflect that back to you, and I'm sure that you both have your thoughts on it. But I mean, it's where kids learn boundaries. It's figuring out kind of what is too much and what's not enough. It's being able to make decisions on your own without adults. I mean, it's amazing that kids used to just pick their own teams. And yes, there was always somebody that was picked last, but guess what? They didn't have instruction, they didn't have direction. Like they figured it out because they wanted to play. And I think that's the biggest issue is that there's an uh, um parents are overly kind of there's an over insertion on every level. And by the way, the younger the kids get, the more, that kind of has to be. But that sandlot play, that like unstructured play that you're talking about, I mean, that really belonged to kids. And so I think that's the biggest difference. And it taught them because they always wanted to play. So stuff happened and someone was being a jerk and they put the kid in their place because they wanted to play. And they would often be able to figure it out and figure out their own rules. And in those circumstances, the kids that would be picked last also was the one that would get an extra at bat, or they, cut him or her, a little slack, and they might roll their eyeballs. But it was much more inclusive, I think, than what people kind of see now, especially with those travel teams. And this is just like my, this is just my opinion. This is just
No,
kind of
I
stream of
share it.
consciousness. But
Was it a foul or was it not a foul? You call your own fouls. Was it a fair ball
Yeah.
or a foul ball? Was it a penalty? Whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think we can all think back on those times of the elementary school going out to the playground and how you're going to pick the kickball team. You just went out and played. And yeah, sometimes it was bad and sometimes it was good, but there was a certain euphoria about the experience for sure. I want to take a slightly different path with this next question. You've spoken for a long time about the need for athletes to pay as much attention to their mental health as their physical health in their training regimen. Can you take us through why that's so important?
for a very long time, athletes get a lot of mixed messages. Just do it. Don't think about it. You're thinking too much. You're a head case. This idea of thinking when you were an athlete somehow didn't kind of mesh. It was like just train your body and don't worry about anything else. Don't think about it. But, as humans, we always think. So it's about thinking the right things in the right moment, not, being able to help ourselves rather than hurting ourselves. Athletes kind of get inculcated to be hyper critical of what they're doing with kind of a misguided idea that somehow that could be motivating, and it chips away at self-esteem, it chips away, at a lot of things. And when that internal discourse is negative all the time, it's just as detrimental as having a coach that's screaming at you, or and I think mental, I talk about mental strength and conditioning because athletes recognize that framework already. There are things that you're good at. There are things that you need to work on for your sport. You know what those things are, and you have a plan on how to improve them. I feel like the same is true, in the way that we think, and that there are some things that help us, there are some things that hurt us. And I think we have to be really honest about learning in that space the things that we can do in order to not, kind of get in our own way or get out of our heads, or, all of those things that you hear. And it's like, if you are only training your body, you're only training half the athlete. No athlete would ever think that they could sit on a couch and get up and run a marathon and have the best marathon that they could ever do, right? Because they didn't train for it. And yet when it comes to kind of having the right mindset, but not putting any work into that, hope is not a strategy. And so I think being able to think through the ways in which the ways we think can be helpful or, again, harmful. They can be constructive or they can be destructive. And I think, being able to pay attention to that and take the time, which is nothing as close to the physical training, but it is being consistent, and it is creating a better habit of thought, the same way that we create good physical training habits. And I think that the athletes that tap into that in general have a better experience, because it also is something that they are very much in control of.
What are some things that athletes can do to work on their mental conditioning and their mental wellness?
So there are a lot of things, but let me give you one simple kind of suggestion that we'll make to athletes, which is kind of using this AAA system. So after a training or a competition, asking 3 questions. The first question is, what went well? And, shockingly or not, sometimes that's a very hard question for athletes to answer. They're so kind of focused on what went wrong that they have a hard time thinking about what went well. And it's important to do it in training, because you also need to do that at the starting line, because it's the most powerful thing you have, what you can do. But that takes, practice, and it's a habit. So that first thing is this acknowledgement, what went well. The second thing is an assessment. And oftentimes an athlete might look to their coach, or they want video review, and we ask them to just intuitively think, like, what would you do differently? What would you change if you could take that run again? What would you do if you could make that play again? And the third piece of that is the action piece. How would you try to do that? And once they kind of, and then it's athlete accountability. They're not, if they need help, they can ask the coach. But oftentimes they don't recognize that their own lived experience is the very first, tool is reflection. Like, what just happened? And think about it before you do other kinds of things. And, just like in sport, kind of sometimes getting back to basics, people want to hyper focus on like some tiny granular, very, very specific thing, but they're not moving quickly, or they're not moving their feet, or, and it's easy to forget the basics when you're at a certain level and you're really focused. So kind of always getting back to that is important. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but you know, you want to be careful of making sure that you recognize that positive self-talk is, and I don't mean like sugarcoating things, but if you can acknowledge what went well, you shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable about that. Oh, I'm being soft. Like I can't talk about what went well. I have to like talk about my mistakes and how to fix them. And you know, I think goal setting is very, very important. You don't know where you're going if you don't know where you're going. I think setting very realistic expectations so that where any athlete is at any moment, being very honest about that and having expectations that are a good fit. Because when the expectations are too far away from reality, that space gets filled with disappointment, anger, sadness, frustration, all of those things. But if we can bring them closer, it actually is a way to move up the trajectory. So when there's that huge gap, it's just constant disappointment rather than, wow, a success. Now I can move on to the next thing and feel good about it.
I had a question that has been on my mind for a while, and I'm going to relate it a little bit to before Tim and I connected on this podcast, I was actually doing another podcast. It was really bad. It wasn't good, but it was like a test for this. Anyway, long way to get to what I'm about to say. Right before the Tokyo Olympics, one of the things we did was pick what is going to be the biggest story out of those games. And I said Simone Biles is going to be the biggest story, thinking that she was going to capture another medal, become, you know, this unbelievably decorated athlete, and she was going to be a big story. Famously, she pulled herself out of the games and spoke very openly about some of the things she was dealing with. The next episode, we came back, and my co-host was laughing at me, saying, "How does it feel to have the worst prediction of all time?" And I said, I think my prediction stands. I think she was the biggest story coming out of the Olympics. Tim knows I like to make these things about me, so I'm doing it again, I recognize. But as someone that works with Olympic level athletes.
And a former gymnast yourself.
And a former gymnast yourself, exactly.
Not you, David Morrow.
Yeah. Well,
you might have been.
Yeah, a lot of mental gymnastics. How did you feel about that moment? And did you believe that was an important moment in this movement, I suppose, to recognize the importance of wellness and mental health?
So great question. I don't work with Simone, so I want to make that clear. The twisties are a real thing, you know, a kinesthetic disconnection that happens in a moment where an athlete does not know, where a gymnast doesn't know where they are. I mean, I guess it can happen in aerial skiing or trampoline or whatever. It is terrifying. And I can't imagine for her, whose amplitude is usually twice what an average gymnast is, what that felt like to not know. And more than the mental health thing, I think it was also a respect for people being able to make decisions for themselves in that moment and be respected and supported in that decision making. And that to me was really the biggest story. And there was a lot, you know, suck it up and just get through it. Like that, it was really always very jarring and infuriating to me to hear those kinds of comments. Like, this is the Olympics, but to be able to take the time and to go to the gym in Tokyo and be by herself and to not know, there were no promises. There was not anything. And for some people, you know, it can resolve in a few days. And I think, you know, we're certain that stress exacerbates those disconnections that happen. And I just feel like her ability to say, like, no, was actually the biggest story.
I feel validated.
Yeah, and well, I'm going to validate you even more.
Boom.
We have a tradition on the show when one of our guests says "great question" or something to that effect. We give it the person who did not write the question gives a shout out to the person who did write the question, and that was David's question. So kudos to David.
And yeah, I feel pretty good about this one, Tim, because you did most of the prep on this. So that was a breakthrough moment for me.
Am I allowed to say good question again?
You can,
yeah,
but we don't believe that it would be sincere at that point.
Yeah, Tim,
but
you
I
should
will.
have waited.
Tim's questions are always good.
You do some consulting to the USOPC. What are some of the specific ways that you work with Team USA athletes on their mental wellness?
So I do a little bit less of that, but I'd like to give a plug to the USOPC and the program that they've grown over the last 4 years, which is a very new, deep and wide psychological services program. So starting in 2021, they hired a director to really bring a more robust field of practitioners and people who had experience in some different specialties, some being clinical mental health with athletes, some being mental performance, but a big cadre with the ability for athletes to choose providers that they felt like would be the best fit for them. And that was a very different model. They've created a USOPC mental health registry so that if people don't want to work with someone within the system, they have a whole registry of people outside that have been vetted by the USOPC to be able to work with them. They have hotlines and many ways for athletes to reach out if they're ever feeling, under duress, need someone to talk to, have an issue that they can't solve or get past. And, this has been something that, kind of existed before that, but really with a very small group, a skeleton crew basically that was covering 52 NGBs. And now there's just this big, robust psychological services program that is building out, education and clinical services and mental performance education and services. And that is, something that I'm really proud to say that the USOPC has worked very hard on and has put a lot of money and invested in. And I think that says a lot for this difference of like, just do it, don't worry about it, don't think about it. And I think we're going to see that really change the experience that athletes have, not only at Olympic Games, where they have emergency mental health officers and they have people who've been working with them who are there, that they know these aren't just like random people that show up. And I would say in 10 years, we're going to look back and say, like, this was a very powerful program that changed the experience of the athletes within our national team and Olympic programs.
I want to follow up a little on that. And we're only 8 months out from the next Winter Olympic Games in Milano Cortina. When, as a person watching the games, we talked about the Simone Biles situation, and we know that athletes are now getting trained in the areas of mental health a little more now. What things are we not seeing in terms of their state of mind and the mental approach in that moment? And, because we just talked about this, we'll just go out and do it. We know that's not the case. So what little tidbits can you share with our listeners about kind of what's going through an athlete's mind?
Well, as you can imagine, I mean, the Olympics are very unique, the fact that they happen every 4 years. So it's not a world championship. It's not something that happens every year or every other year. And it's so, I mean, have either of you been to a Winter Olympic Games?
Yes.
And where were you, Dave? Where
Salt
did
Lake
you?
City.
Okay. Tim?
No, I've been to World Cup events with luge and bobsled, but I've never been to games.
So there is this electric, anticipatory, incredible energy. Like people's feet aren't even on the ground. There are 7 different venues that are going to happen in Milan Cortina. So it's a very dispersed, unlike any other games has ever been. Beijing was like isolated because of COVID, but Milan Cortina will be separate because there are 7 separate venues that are quite spread out. And they're trying an experiment. They want to see if this will work. It diminishes the ability of athletes to go see other athletes compete because the distance is so great. But they've also like pivoted in great ways. So instead of having one opening ceremonies, there will be more than one, so that they don't have to get on a bus and travel for 19 hours there and back. But I think what you don't see is the excitement of making it, and then the sheer joy, unlike any other event that I've seen, of really like being in it. And yes, there's, I mean, incredible amounts of, and everyone's different. There are people who are filled with joy and people who are in the closet soiling their pants because they're so nervous before the game. And it's just, that's how it is. That's kind of personality differences. But I think, you don't see the team behind the team. And sometimes you don't see all the performances. You might see the top finals, but being there and seeing the friendships that are forged, the way that those organically kind of happen in the dining halls, in trading pins or pieces of uniforms, like it really is, it's really a special thing. And I think, competition wise, it's it's not necessarily helpful to say, like, just imagine that you're at your home track and I mean, it's the Olympics. So let's harness all of that extra and think before the events, like how we're going to use that extra. Where would we want to put it? In the last third of the skating routine where you start to feel tired, you're going to feel that extra energy coming from the audience. Or being able to relax on the luge track enough to be in control, but not overly trying to drive your sled. And you think about what that feels like. And I think the veterans do a phenomenal job helping the, rookies who have a first, so they get paired. An athlete who's been to a games before gets paired with an athlete who hasn't, and they just get to like share experiences and little tidbits and pearls of wisdom of like what can be helpful and what to think about before you get there. Many of our teams who compete in World Cups will already be in Europe, so the travel to China was so daunting, and we're not going to have that. There are things that are going to be really so much better in terms of being able to adapt and get ready to compete. And you never have you know you never see everyone's stories, and I think that's something that's really special because everyone has an amazing story of how they've gotten there.
This is the second year in a row we've had somebody on during Mental Health Awareness Month. We think it's really important, not just in the world of sports, but in the world in general. So thank you so much. But before we let you go, we have 2 questions that we always ask our guests. The first one is, how did you get your start in this aspect of the sports industry?
I got my start, I guess, like, my own personal experience of like having I was on the beam getting ready to do something that I'd done 500 times before, and all of a sudden I was like, I can't do it. Um, and it took me a little while to kind of get back to that, but I was very intrigued by the idea that like I had all this power in my noggin to decide that I could or I couldn't. And I just kind of kept being really intrigued by that. Um and also just paying attention to the different developmental lives that athletes versus non-athletes had, you know, my high school experience, my college experience, like just kind of paying attention and being curious in those ways of what people's lived experience was like as an athlete. And you know, it took me uh, I was all but dissertation for 7 years. I mean, it took me a long time to get through it, but I did, and I'm still pretty proud of that. And you know, we moved to Lake Placid not for me, but because of my husband's job. He's an orthopedic surgeon. Um, but it just turned out to be such good luck and serendipity because it's really offered so many opportunities to just kind of step in and step out and meet so many incredible athletes and coaches and, you know, people involved in sports that people don't pay attention to, except the Olympics.
And the last question, what one piece of advice would you have for somebody who's looking to break into your line of work?
Great question. I would say don't get too focused in the, you know, if you're interested in sports psychology, think about it not through the eyes of someone that's going to work for an Olympic or a professional team, but someone who might work at a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA or something that helps anyone who wants to do something better the next time be able to look at ways in which they can do that. And I also just want to say for Mental Health Awareness Month, you know, check in on your people, check in with yourself when something becomes too difficult. There are people, there are places, there are texts and hotlines, and there are lots of ways to help remember that you are not alone and that there are people to help and support and just be honest and don't try to push through things that just feel too big.
We may not be able to go back to the origin of that original question since it is asked of everyone, but I'm assuming it was probably Tim when we templatized this.
Stop. Mara, we can't thank you enough. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy your insights. They're going to learn a lot for sure, because I know I did. But we're really happy that you joined us. It's always fun to have a friend.
Thank you so much.
It's always fun to have a friend on the show.
Well, I appreciate you asking, and thanks for talking about something that's so, you know, interesting and big and young and continuing to develop. And, you know, just watch what happens, because I think it's going to get more and more exciting.
Thank you, Mara.
Thank
such
you
a
so
pleasure
much for
meeting
having
you.
me.
We are back. Man, a lot to think on from that chat with Dr. Mara. You know, during Mental Health Awareness Month, I think that was an important guest, and very glad that we were able to have her on. So, okay, now the time for other business, whether that's shout outs or things we're looking forward to. So, Tim, I will throw it over to you. What do you have your eye on?
Well, I'm continuing to watch the playoffs in both NBA and NHL. Interestingly, as we sit here today, all four series, two in the NBA, two in the NHL, are all 3-1. So the Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder are trying to close out their series. The Oilers and the Panthers trying to close out theirs. Interestingly, if all four teams um, close it out in 5 or 6, right? Team won't get that advantage of a extended layoff or disadvantage, as the case may be. So I'm continuing to watch that. Um, Also fun to see John Halliburton, Tyrese Halliburton's dad, back at his son's playoff games for the first time since the end of the first round series against the Bucks, where he confronted Giannis Antetokounmpo. It was funny to see him sitting in a suite. I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the conditions
Right.
for his return to watching the games. It doesn't give him a chance to go down and confront anybody. But you know, there are a lot of people here in the New York area where both you and I are that are already counting the Knicks out. Obviously, it's a big hill to climb, and many of those same people are already calling for Coach Thibodeau's head if they don't come back and win this series, which I think is kind of crazy. So, what about you?
Yeah, despite it being 3-1 now, I think this series has been great. These games have been tremendous, very, very close. The teams are fighting hard. And this Pacers team is really good, by the way. We joked a little about whether or not Tyrese Halliburton was overrated last week because apparently he was voted that. You mentioned, I mean, after last night's game, I think if you'd continue to say that, I mean, he was just unbelievable. No turnovers, 15 assists, I think. His court vision is incredible. And it's whether both these series close out 4-1, we will see. But they've been good series. Now, if this ends up Indiana, OKC in the final, which it could, I think the conventional wisdom would be that it's not going to be a great, television viewership number, but we will see. I think the NBA has some so many exciting players to watch, but it'll be a little affected by it not being the Knicks. But
certainly two of the smaller media markets in the league, and the NHL can't be too happy, at least here in the States, if Edmonton prevails and we have a rematch of last year's finals with the Panthers. Again, assuming the Panthers hold serve and can close out the Hurricanes.
So one of the other things I have my eye on as a story is the CFP and the changing model. It was reported that the CFP Management Committee voted unanimously recently to go to a straight seeding model, ranking the 12 teams, even though the top 5 would still get guaranteed, but they would just shift them up and rank them all the way 1 to 12. But even after that was unanimous, the SEC is making waves, and you could assume that that's going to be the SEC and Big Ten as it moves to a 16 team and saying we want 4 slots basically between those two conferences. And I think that's going to, and as people are saying, not all these conferences that are part of that, the FBS conference commissioners and Notre Dame being part of this decision, they're not all equal. And the SEC and the Big Ten are a little more equal. So it's going to be interesting to see. They have, till the end of the year to make some additional changes. And it's just a story I'm going to be watching. And I just find it interesting that you have a unanimous vote one day and the next day out, a commissioner from the strongest or most powerful conference is saying what they want, which is not exactly the same as what they just voted for.
Yeah, I ought to have been a fly on the wall in those meetings when they voted.
Yeah. All right, Tim, I think we'll bring this one to a close if you're good with that.
Yeah, sure.
All right. One final thanks to Dr. Mara Smith. She's one impressive Cornell grad, I will say that.
Yes,
Thank you mostly to all of you for listening, spending some time with us. Remember to follow us on whichever platform you get your podcasts, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and engage with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and even TikTok. I have a lot of fun with TikTok, I got to tell you, as you, I think, can tell from the comments I make, off recording. But anyway, we very much appreciate all the engagement. So until next time, I'm DP, he's McGee, and we'll talk soon.